So we were going to talk about differences and similarities between Pilates practice and yoga asanas practice.
A lot of people get them mixed up and think that like one is just a form or a copy of the other. And it's really very not true. They have very different histories and different practices.
So yoga asanas practice, according to many practitioners, has roots in ancient South Asia. It has often been fused with South Asian spiritual practices, including the dominant Hindu indigenous culture, as well as some Buddhist traditions. And those have all threaded into how yoga works and what has influenced it. And there's also a big thread of influence and revival in the physical poses that came into play the late 1950s, early 1960s. And that was partially when the asanas practices were brought to the US and the global north. Yoga asanas in particular are meant to move through the full body and also be a mind body or a body plus spiritual practice on some level.
Pilates has a very different history, first of all, much, much shorter history. It was developed in the early 1900s by a guy named Joseph Pilates. I'm about to tell you who the fuck he is. He was actually in a World War I concentration camp, and he was observing the movements of cats at the camp, and that gave him ideas for different movements that he could do to keep himself in shape. Once he got out of that camp, he developed what he called contrology, which is a terrible name. I'm glad we call it Pilates now. And he started to practice in New York City, and ballerinas noticed him, and they noticed that they could get back on their feet a lot faster after an injury if they worked with him. It quickly became a countrywide practice, and today most of us who do classical Pilates are still working upon those philosophies of Joe Pilates, but there's all kinds of different Pilates out there. There's contemporary Pilates, there's stuff that's not Pilates like Legree, like the Megaformer, whatever those things are, those are not Pilates. It really is a full body exercise system. People think it looks funny. People think it only works certain parts of the body. No, it works the entire body. You don't need any expensive equipment to do it. You don't have to go to a class. You can do it on a mat at home. That's one of the things I like best about it.
Would you say that Pilates in particular emphasizes focus on like a certain part of the body or mind or anything like that?
Well, emphasis is always on the core because that's where everything, all of your strength comes from. It comes from your core out through your limbs into your fingers. So that is where we really focus on having our strength come from. Everything, you're using your abs, you're using your glutes, you're using your lats. So yeah, the focus is on the core, but there is an exercise in Pilates for every single muscle you've got.
Wow, I didn't actually realize that. They said in a weird cable access infomercial way.
Right down to the arches of the feet.
In contrast, yoga asanas practice also has movement for every part of the body. But again, I've always been conscious of the fact that Pilates has more so emphasized the core. And I will tell you that with yoga, your core absolutely will get stronger if you continue with the asanas practice, but it's less deliberate and it's less working towards the specific westernized fitness mentality of building up the core, even though it might happen as a side effect
byproduct
of the practice. Yeah.